Okay, I canceled my mom's card. Now she'll have to call me and beg. I heard my son Maxwell say those words over the phone, laughing, as if it were the funniest joke in the world. I was on the other side of his office door, paralyzed, feeling how every word was a knife straight to the heart. But the worst was yet to come. Because that very same afternoon, at 6 o'clock sharp, Maxwell arrived at his apartment and froze completely at the scene. The entire living room was full of boxes with his belongings, suitcases stacked by the door, and his wife Claire sitting on the sofa, crying her eyes out. "Honey," she sobbed when she saw him. "Your mom canceled our lease. We have nowhere to live." I saw my son's face go pale, saw the arrogance crumble in a second, and I felt something I never thought I'd feel toward my own child, a cold, calculated, deserved satisfaction. But to understand how we got to that moment, I have to tell you the whole story from the beginning. My name is Margaret. I'm 66 years old, and my whole life I believed a mother's love was unconditional, unbreakable, eternal. I believed children always valued their parents' sacrifices, that family was the most sacred thing that existed. I was wrong, and that mistake almost destroyed me. It all started 2 years ago, when my son Maxwell, my only son, the boy I raised by myself after I was widowed, decided to marry Claire. I was happy for him, I really was. After years of seeing him in failed relationships, he finally seemed to have found someone who made him smile. Claire was a sweet, shy girl, worked as an elementary school teacher, and always treated me with respect. I thought she would be the perfect daughter-in-law, that I would finally have the united family I always dreamed of. When I was widowed 7 years ago, after my husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, I learned to be strong. I had to be. I worked as an accountant for 40 years, saved every penny I could, and managed to build something solid. My own house, where Robert and I lived our best years, and 2 small condos I bought as investments, which I rented out for a steady monthly income. I wasn't a millionaire. I didn't live in luxury, but I was independent. I had my dignity, my stability, my peace. Or so I thought. Maxwell was always spoiled, I admit it. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe after losing Robert I wanted to compensate for that absence by giving him everything he asked for. I paid for his entire college education, bought him his first car when he graduated, helped him with the down payment for his consulting business. I always thought I was investing in his future, that one day he would do the same for his children. That's how families worked. When he announced his engagement to Claire, I didn't hesitate for a second to help with the wedding expenses. I spent almost $15,000 between the venue, the food, Claire's dress, everything. I wanted them to have the perfect day, to start their marriage without debt, without worries. But that's where I made my first mistake. Because after the wedding, Maxwell came to visit me with a proposal. "Mom," he said with that charming smile he always used when he wanted something, "Claire and I are looking for an apartment, but the rent is insane. What if we rent your condo on Maple Street? We'd pay you, of course, but it would be much cheaper than looking elsewhere." I looked at my son, saw the hope in his eyes, and I couldn't say no. I normally rented that condo for $800 a month, but I told Maxwell he would only pay $300, next to nothing, just to cover the basic expenses. "Okay, son," I replied, "but on one condition, we'll sign a formal lease, all legal, so there are no problems later." Maxwell laughed, hugged me, told me I was the best mom in the world. We signed the papers that same week. Claire was radiant, thanked me 1,000 times, brought me flowers. Everything seemed perfect. The first 6 months were peaceful. Maxwell paid on time, visited every Sunday for dinner. Claire would call me on the phone for recipes or advice. I felt useful, loved, an important part of their lives. I would sit every afternoon in my green velvet armchair, the same one where Robert used to read the paper, drink my tea from the white china teacup I inherited from my mother, and look out the window feeling that life, despite the losses, still had meaning. But then the subtle changes began. Those little details a mother notices but tries to ignore because she doesn't want to believe something is wrong. Maxwell started showing up late for our Sunday dinners. Sometimes he wouldn't even come, sending a text message apologizing, saying he had too much work. When he did come, he seemed distracted, constantly on his phone, answering in monosyllables. Claire stopped calling me as much, and when she did, her voice sounded tense. One Sunday, when they both finally came for dinner, I noticed something strange. Maxwell was wearing a new watch, one of those expensive Swiss brand watches that cost thousands of dollars. Claire had a designer handbag hanging on her chair, the kind that costs over $2,000. I saw them and felt a pang of unease in my chest. "That's a nice watch, son," I commented, trying to sound casual. "It was a gift." Maxwell smiled smugly, lifting his wrist for me to see it better. "I bought it for myself, Mom. My business is really taking off. Things are going great." I nodded, I smiled, but inside something didn't add up. If his business was doing so well, why was he still living in my condo paying just $300? Why wasn't he looking for a better place, one that matched his supposed success? I kept my doubts to myself. I didn't want to be the meddling mother, the critical mother-in-law. But the signs kept appearing, one after another, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't see clearly yet. 2 weeks after that dinner, I got a call that left me cold. It was the bank. An automated message about a declined charge on my credit card due to insufficient funds. I hung up, confused, checked my banking app on my phone, and what I saw took my breath away. My checking account, where I always kept at least $5,000 for emergencies, had a balance of just $200. I checked the transactions with trembling hands, and there they were. Transfers I hadn't authorized, payments to electronic stores, expensive restaurants, a luxury clothing store, all made in the last 2 months, all for amounts between $500 and $1,500. I felt like the walls were closing in. I immediately called the bank. "Mrs. Margaret," the representative explained in a professional voice, "these charges were authorized with your additional debit card, the one registered to Maxwell as an authorized user." I was speechless. Yes, I remembered adding Maxwell as an authorized user years ago, when he was in college, and I wanted him to have access to money in case of emergencies. But that was over 15 years ago. I never thought he still had that card. I never imagined he would use it like this. "Can I cancel that authorization?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Of course, ma'am, but we need you to come in person with an official ID." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the wall, feeling the betrayal settle in my chest like a heavy stone. My own son was stealing from me. There was no other word for it. He was stealing from me and didn't even have the decency to ask. I took a deep breath, poured myself a glass of water, and decided that before confronting him, I needed to be sure. I needed to understand what was really happening. I didn't want to be the paranoid mother accusing without proof. So that same afternoon, I went to the bank, canceled Maxwell's authorization, changed all my passwords, and requested a complete report of all transactions for the last 6 months. What I discovered was worse than I imagined. Maxwell had spent almost $8,000 from my account in total. $8,000 that were mine, that I had earned with my work, with my sacrifices. I felt nauseous seeing the endless list of purchases. Dinners at luxury restaurants, expensive clothes, electronics. He had even paid for a vacation to Cancun for him and Claire. All with my money, all behind my back. I put the papers in an envelope, left them in my desk drawer, and waited. Because I still had a small hope that there was an explanation, that my son would come to me, confess he was having financial problems, that he would ask me for help like a responsible adult. But that hope died 3 days later. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 4 o'clock. I had gone to Maxwell's apartment because Claire had called me that morning asking me to bring over some Tupperware with food. She said she'd had a stomach bug and didn't feel like cooking. I knocked on the door. No one answered, but I heard voices inside. I used the owner's copy of the key I had and walked in, calling out, "Claire? It's me, Margaret. I brought you the food." Silence. I walked toward the living room, and then I heard it. Maxwell's voice coming from his office, the small room he used for work. He was on the phone, and his tone was mocking, arrogant, completely different from the one he used with me. "No, man, I'm telling you it's handled," he was saying, laughing. "I canceled the additional card I had from my mom before she realized how much I spent. The old lady doesn't even check her statements regularly. And you know what the best part is? Now that she canceled my access to her account, I canceled her main credit card. I have copies of her documents. I made the call to the bank, pretending to be her financial advisor, and that's it. Now, if she wants her card back, she's going to have to call me. She's going to have to beg. She's going to have to understand that she can't treat me like a kid anymore. It's time she learns who's in control here. I was petrified on the other side of the door. I felt the floor disappear from under me, all the air rush out of my lungs at once. My son, my only son, the boy I had dedicated my entire life to, was planning to manipulate me, to humiliate me. And the worst part was the tone of his voice. That cruel laugh, that sick satisfaction in talking about making me beg. I backed away silently, left the apartment without making a sound, went down the stairs with my legs shaking, got to my car and just sat there, clinging to the steering wheel, trying to process what I had just heard. The tears came later, when I got home, when I closed the door behind me and finally let myself feel all the pain, all the betrayal, all the disappointment. I cried like I hadn't cried since Robert's funeral. I cried for the son I thought I had, who turned out to be a stranger. I cried for all the years of sacrifice that he trampled on without a second thought. I cried for my naivety, for trusting blindly, for not seeing the signs sooner. I sat in my green velvet armchair, the same one where I had so often imagined my future grandchildren playing, and I felt the entire future I had dreamed of crumble to ashes. But then, among the tears, something changed. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest, a determination I didn't know I had. I looked at the white china teacup I still had in my hand, the cup my mother had given me before she died, the cup that had survived decades of moves and hardships, and I understood something fundamental. I, too, had survived worse. I had survived my husband's death. I had survived years of hard work. I had built a life from nothing, and I was not going to let my own son destroy me. If Maxwell wanted to play at being the smart one, if he wanted to manipulate and control me, he was about to find out that his mother was not the naive old woman he thought she was. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake at my desk, reviewing every document I had. The lease agreement for the condo where Maxwell lived, the deeds to my properties, my bank accounts, everything. I reviewed every detail with the meticulousness of the accountant I had been for 40 years. And as I reviewed, a plan began to form in my mind, a cold, calculated, perfect plan. Maxwell wanted to make me beg? Fine. But he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Because it turned out that the condo where he lived, so comfortably paying just $300 a month, was still entirely in my name. And the lease we had signed had a very specific clause that I had included myself. Immediate cancellation of the contract in case of breach or inappropriate conduct by the tenant. I smiled for the first time in days, a small, sad, but determined smile. The next morning I would call my lawyer, and then the real game would begin. At 8:00 in the morning on Friday, I called Stephen Foster, my trusted lawyer for over 20 years. Stephen was the one who helped me with all the legal paperwork when Robert died, who reviewed the purchase contracts for my condos, who always advised me with patience and honesty. "Margaret," he answered in his warm, familiar voice. "What a surprise to hear from you so early. Everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Stephen, I need you to review a lease agreement and tell me exactly what my rights are as the owner to terminate it." There was a pause. Trouble with a tenant? His voice became professional, alert. "Yes," I replied, feeling the word get stuck in my throat, "with my son, Maxwell." Stephen didn't ask unnecessary questions. He asked me to email him a copy of the lease and to meet him at his office that afternoon. At 3:00, I was sitting across from his desk, watching him read every line of the document carefully. Finally, he looked up, took off his glasses, and looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. "Margaret, I'm very sorry you're going through this, but legally, you are in the right. This lease clearly specifies it requires a 30-day notice for cancellation by either party, but it also includes this clause for immediate termination for just cause. If you can prove Maxwell engaged in fraudulent conduct or improperly used confidential information of yours as the owner, you can terminate the lease immediately." I pulled the envelope with the bank statements from my purse, the copies of the unauthorized transactions, all perfectly organized. Stephen reviewed every paper carefully, taking notes in his legal pad. "This is enough," he said finally. "Maxwell used an old bank authorization to access your money without your current consent. That's a breach of trust. Technically, it could be considered familial fraud. You have solid grounds to terminate the lease." He explained the process. I needed to send a legal eviction notice, a 72-hour notice. A process server would have to deliver it in person, and after that period, Maxwell and Claire would have to vacate the property. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Stephen asked gently. "He's your son, Margaret. Once you take this step, there's no going back." I looked out his office window, saw the city stretching out under the gray afternoon sky, and I thought of all the times Maxwell had hugged me as a child, all the nights I stayed up with him when he had a fever, all the sacrifices I made believing I was building a future for him. And then I remembered his words, "Now she'll have to call me and beg." I remembered the cruel laugh, the contempt, the satisfaction in planning my humiliation. "I'm completely sure," I replied, my voice cold and firm, one I didn't recognize as my own. "Proceed with everything, Stephen. I want the eviction executed exactly on Monday at 6 in the afternoon." Stephen nodded and began drafting the documents immediately. While he worked, I took out my phone and checked my bank accounts. Just as Maxwell had promised on the phone, my main credit card was blocked. I called the bank, explained the situation, filed a formal complaint for identity theft, and after 2 hours of bureaucratic hurdles, I managed to get my card reactivated and block any future access Maxwell might have. I also changed all my account passwords, updated my security questions, and made sure none of my documents were within my son's reach. That Monday morning, a process server knocked on Maxwell's apartment door. I watched from my car parked across the street, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Claire opened the door, received the legal notice, and signed the receipt with a trembling hand. I saw her read the document, watched her face go pale, her eyes fill with tears. I felt a pang of guilt, because Claire really did seem like a good girl, but I reminded myself that this was necessary, that I couldn't let Maxwell continue to manipulate me. The server left, Claire closed the door, and I started my car and drove home, feeling a strange mixture of power and sadness. For the next 3 days, Maxwell tried to call me 16 times. 16 calls that I declined, one after another. He sent text messages that said things like, "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently. I don't understand what's happening. Please answer." I deleted every message without replying. He also tried to come to my house, banged on the door for 20 minutes one Tuesday night, shouting, "Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk." I stayed in my green velvet armchair, drinking my tea from the white china teacup, listening to his pounding and his pleas, without moving. Because now he was the one begging. Now he was the one who needed something from me, and I had decided he would get nothing until it was too late. On Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before the eviction, I got a call from Claire. Her voice was broken, desperate. "Margaret, please. I know Maxwell did something wrong. He told me everything. I know he used your money without permission, and I swear I didn't know anything. I swear. I thought everything he bought was with his work money. Please, give me a chance to explain." I felt my resolve waver for a moment. Claire's voice sounded genuine, frightened. But then I remembered Claire had worn that $2,000 handbag bought with my money, that she had gone to Cancun with my money, that she had enjoyed all those luxuries while I worked hard to maintain my savings. "Claire," I replied, my voice calm, "I understand you're scared, but my decision is made. The lease ends on Friday at 6 in the afternoon. You have until then to vacate the apartment." "But where will we go?" she sobbed. "We don't have money saved for a new apartment," Maxwell says. "His business is in trouble. He doesn't even have enough for a deposit somewhere else." Those words confirmed my suspicions. Maxwell hadn't just stolen from me. He had lied about his business's success. He had spent my money trying to maintain a facade of prosperity that didn't exist. "That's not my problem, Claire," I replied, and I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking. I felt like a terrible person, but I reminded myself that I hadn't created this situation. Maxwell did. He made the decisions that led us here, and now he would have to face the consequences. I barely slept on Thursday night. I knew that the next day, at 6 in the afternoon, Maxwell and Claire would have to leave the apartment. I knew they would probably come to my house afterward, that an inevitable confrontation was coming. I spent the whole day preparing mentally, reviewing all the documents I had over and over: the bank statements, the recordings of the calls to the bank reporting the fraud, copies of all the threatening messages Maxwell had sent me when he finally understood I wasn't going to budge. I organized everything into a red folder, left it on my living room table, and waited. Friday dawned overcast, with that kind of gray sky that seems to predict a storm. I got up at 6 in the morning, made my coffee, and sat in the kitchen watching the clock tick by slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. At 9, Stephen called to confirm that everything was in order, that the process server would be present at 6 o'clock sharp to oversee the eviction. "Do you want me to be there with you?" he asked with genuine concern. "No," I replied. "I need to do this alone." But that wasn't entirely true. The truth was, I needed to see Maxwell's face when he realized he had completely underestimated his mother. I spent the day in a strange state of tense calm. I cleaned my house from top to bottom, even though it was already spotless. I watered my plants, organized my closet, prepared food I had no appetite to eat. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind distracted. At 5:30 in the afternoon, I dressed in my best outfit, a beige pantsuit that Robert had given me years ago, my pearl earrings, my hair pulled back in an elegant bun. I wanted to look dignified, strong, unbreakable. I looked at myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes were hard, determined, so different from the naive Margaret who had trusted her son blindly. At 5:45, my phone started ringing off the hook. It was Maxwell. I declined the call. He immediately called back. I declined again. Then a text message arrived. "Mom, please, just give me 10 minutes to explain everything. I made a mistake, I know, but you can't do this. We're family." I read the message and felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Now he wanted 10 minutes to explain. Now we were family. But when he was planning to make me beg, when he was laughing about me with his friends, when he was stealing my money to maintain his fake lifestyle, he didn't care that we were family. I didn't reply. I silenced my phone and put it in my purse. At 6 o'clock sharp, I got a text from Stephen with a photo. It was Maxwell's apartment. I could see mountains of boxes stacked in the living room, suitcases by the door, furniture piled up haphazardly. The process server was standing in the middle, supervising. Claire was sitting on the sofa, crying with her face in her hands. And Maxwell wasn't there. According to Stephen's message, Maxwell had run out of the apartment half an hour earlier, shouting that he was going to talk this out, that his mother couldn't do this to him. I smiled. I knew exactly where he had gone. 20 minutes later, I heard a car slam on its brakes in front of my house. Hurried footsteps. Desperate banging on my door. "Mom, open the door! We need to talk now!" Maxwell's voice was frantic, furious, desperate. I got up from my armchair, smoothed my pants, took a deep breath, and walked to the door with slow, measured steps. Each step was a conscious decision. Each step was a reaffirmation of my dignity. I opened the door, and there was my son, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red with fury and panic. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled without even greeting me. "How can you throw us out on the street like this? I'm your son." I looked at him in silence for a long moment. I observed every detail of his face, searching for any trace of genuine regret, of shame, of acknowledgement of what he had done. I found nothing. There was only indignation, as if he were the victim, as if I were doing something unjust to him. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. Maxwell stormed in, walked straight into my living room, and turned to face me with clenched fists. "Explain what's happening. Why did you cancel the lease without telling me? Why won't you answer my calls? Claire is a wreck. She's crying nonstop, and I don't know what to tell her." I sat down in my green velvet armchair, folded my hands in my lap, and looked at him with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "Sit down, Maxwell." My voice was soft but firm, the voice of someone in complete control of the situation. He hesitated, clearly expecting a fight, yelling, drama, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I said, "Sit down." This time my tone was sharper. Maxwell flopped onto the sofa across from me, his leg bouncing nervously, his hands rubbing against each other. "Tell me what you want," he spat. "If it's money, if you want me to pay you something, we can work out a payment plan. But you can't just leave us homeless overnight." I took the red folder I had left on the table and placed it on my lap, still closed. "Maxwell, let me ask you a question. Do you remember when you were 10 years old and you were accused of stealing money from the school's donation box?" He blinked, confused by the change of subject. "What does that have to do with?" "Answer the question," I interrupted. Maxwell clenched his jaw. "Yes, I remember. And you defended me because you knew I hadn't done it." "Exactly," I nodded. "I defended you because I trusted you, because I believed your word, because that's what mothers do. We trust our children even when the whole world is pointing fingers." I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street, dark now. "For years, Maxwell, I defended you to everyone. When your father said I was spoiling you, I defended you. When your teachers said you were irresponsible, I defended you. When your own friends warned me you were changing, I ignored them because I thought I knew my son better than anyone." I turned to face him, but it turns in everyone was right, and I was blind. Blinded by love. Blinded by the hope that my son would be an honest, grateful man. Maxwell stood up abruptly. "What are you talking about? Why are you talking like I'm some kind of criminal? I just needed to borrow some money. I was going to pay you back." His voice rose. His cheeks flushed. "Borrowing?" I repeated the word slowly. "Is borrowing money taken without permission? Is borrowing money spent on luxury watches and vacations while your mother is still working to make ends meet?" I opened the red folder and took out the bank statements. $8,200, Maxwell. That's what you took from my account using an authorization I gave you 15 years ago for college emergencies. I placed the papers on the coffee table, one by one, like cards in a poker game. Maxwell looked at them, and his face went from red to white in seconds. I thought, "You have money, Mom? You have your condos, your savings?" His voice became small, childish. "And that gives you the right to steal from me?" I asked, and the word steal hung in the air between us like a bomb. "I didn't steal," he yelled. "I just borrowed. Stealing is taking what doesn't belong to you without the owner's permission." I recited the definition in a flat voice, and that is exactly what you did. Maxwell started pacing my living room, running his hands through his hair. Okay, I made a mistake. I'm sorry." "Is that what you want to hear?" "I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. Mom, now, please. Let us stay in the apartment. I promise I'll pay you back every cent." I watched him fall apart, watched the arrogance turn into desperation, and I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I just felt a deep emptiness, an immense sadness for all that we had lost. "You know what the saddest part is, Maxwell?" I asked, my voice steady, feeling the weight of every word. "It's not the money. I can earn the money back. What's sad is that you destroyed something that can never be recovered. My trust. And without trust, there is no family." Maxwell stopped pacing and looked at me with pleading eyes. Those same eyes he used as a child when he wanted to convince me to buy him a toy or let him stay up late. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a 35-year-old man who had made conscious, calculated, cruel decisions. "Mom, please," his voice broke. "I know I messed up, I know. But give me a chance to fix it. Claire has nothing to do with this. She's innocent. You can't leave her on the street because of my mistakes." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you're worried about Claire? How interesting. Because when you spent $2,000 on that designer handbag for her, when you paid for that vacation to Cancun, when you showered her with gifts with money that wasn't yours, you didn't think about the consequences she would face when this all came to light." Maxwell opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I'm not finished." I pulled out another document from the red folder. It was a printed transcript of the phone call I had overheard, the one Maxwell had with his friend. I had asked a technician to help me document it properly from my phone, where I had recorded parts of the audio. "I want you to read this." "Out loud," I said, handing him the paper. Maxwell took it with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the lines, and I saw the color drain completely from his face. "Mom, read it," I ordered, my voice like steel. He swallowed, his hands shaking so much the paper rustled. I already canceled her card, he began to read, his voice barely audible. Now she'll have to call me and beg if she wants anything. It's time she learns who's in control here. Every word came out of his mouth like venom. The old lady doesn't even check her statements regularly. She's perfect to manipulate. I saw tears begin to well in his eyes, but I felt no compassion. I had spent all my tears over the past few days. I had processed all my pain in solitude. Now there was only the cold, hard truth. Keep going, I instructed when he paused. My mom has always been weak. She always gives in to whatever I ask. I thought it was time to take charge of her finances before she spends it all on stupid things. Maxwell dropped the paper as if it burned his hands. I didn't mean that. I was angry. I was just talking. Angry about what? I interrupted. Angry that your mother gave you everything for 35 years and finally wanted to set a limit? Angry that a 66-year-old woman still has control over the money she earned? I stood up and walked toward him, looking him directly in the eyes. Let me explain something you seem to have never understood. Son, I am not weak. I survived the death of the love of my life. I worked 40 years at a job I didn't always like to build a life. I raised a child by myself who constantly challenged me and demanded more. None of that is weakness. What you mistook for weakness was unconditional love. But it turns out, even unconditional love has limits. Maxwell dropped to his knees in front of me, literally on his knees, his hands clasped in a pathetic plea. Mom, I'm begging you, forgive me. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, I'll get help, I'll change completely. But please, don't leave us homeless. Claire's pregnant. Those last words fell like a bomb in the middle of the living room. I froze, feeling my entire carefully constructed plan threaten to fall apart. What did you say? My voice sounded distant, strange. Claire's pregnant, Maxwell repeated with renewed desperation. 2 months. We hadn't told you yet because we wanted to wait until the 3rd month. But now I need you to know. You're going to be a grandmother. Mom, you can't do this. You can't leave your grandchild homeless. I stepped back as if I'd been physically struck. A grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. For years I had dreamed of that moment. I had imagined what it would be like to hold a baby in my arms again, to watch it grow, to spoil it, to love it. And now Maxwell was using that information as a weapon, as one last desperate card to manipulate me. I saw in his eyes that he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he had found my weak spot. And in that moment, I understood that if I gave in now, if I let this news change my decision, I would be setting a pattern that would repeat for the rest of my life. Maxwell would learn that he could do whatever he wanted, hurt me however he wanted, and there would always be something he could use to manipulate me. First, the grandchild, then the child's well-being, then their education. Always something. Get up, I told him, my voice trembling but firm. Mom, please, I said, get up. My tone allowed no argument. Maxwell slowly got to his feet, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. I looked at him and tried to find the boy he once was, the little one who would hug me and tell me I was the best mom in the world. But that boy didn't exist anymore, if he ever truly did. Congratulations on the baby, I said finally. I hope you'll be a better father than you've been a son. And I hope that child never, ever has to go through what I'm going through right now. Maxwell opened his mouth to speak, but I continued. The eviction stands. You have until 11 o'clock tonight to get all your things out of the apartment. After that time, the process server will change the locks, and any belongings left inside will be considered abandoned. I saw the last bit of hope die in his eyes, replaced by something darker, resentment, even hatred. You know what? He said, his voice thick with rage. I'm not the son you hoped for. But you're not the mother I thought you were, either. A real mother would never leave her son on the street, with his pregnant wife, no matter what he did. You're a bitter, lonely old woman, and you're going to die bitter and lonely. His words were designed to hurt me, to make me feel guilty, to destroy my resolve. And they did hurt, I won't lie. They hurt like 1,000 knives stabbing my heart, but I had already cried all my tears. I had already processed all my pain. His words no longer had the power he thought they did. Maybe, I replied with chilling calm. Maybe you're right, and I will end my days alone. But I'd rather be alone with my dignity intact than accompanied by someone who sees me as an ATM. Now, please, get out of my house. Maxwell looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. This isn't over, he threatened. I'm going to get a lawyer. I'm going to sue you for wrongful eviction, for familial abandonment, for whatever it takes. I nodded calmly. You're free to try. Stephen Foster, my lawyer, will be delighted to present all the evidence of financial fraud, misuse of confidential information, and breach of trust that we've compiled. We can also include this conversation where you're attempting to emotionally blackmail me using your unborn child as a hostage. You decide which path you prefer. Maxwell clenched his fists. His entire body was shaking with contained rage. For a moment, I thought he might get violent, but then something in him broke. His shoulders slumped, his jaw went slack, and all the rage transformed into absolute defeat. You're going to regret this, he said in a low voice. But it no longer sounded like a threat, just a last, desperate attempt to have the final word. He walked to the door, yanked it open, and before leaving, he turned one last time. When that child is born, don't expect to meet him. Don't expect to be part of his life. You chose your money over your family. Now live with that decision. The door slammed shut, a sound that echoed through the house. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by silence, clutching the red folder to my chest like a shield. My legs began to tremble, my whole body began to shake, and I finally let myself fall into my green velvet armchair. The tears I had held back during the entire confrontation finally came, silent and bitter. I cried for the grandchild I might never know, for the family that had just been completely destroyed, for the lost innocence I would never get back. I spent that entire night awake, sitting in my armchair, watching the shadows, the streetlights cast on my living room walls. Every noise made me jump. Every car that passed made me think Maxwell had returned. But he didn't come back. At 11:30 at night, Stephen sent me a message confirming that the apartment had been completely vacated, that Maxwell and Claire had taken all their belongings in a moving truck, and that the locks had been changed. "Are you okay?" he asked at the end of the message. I didn't answer because I didn't know the answer. I wasn't okay, but I also wasn't sorry. I was in an in-between place, an emotional limbo where relief and pain coexisted in equal measure. The following days were the hardest of my life, even worse than the days after Robert's death. Because when Robert died, I at least had the comfort of knowing our love had been real, that we had built something beautiful together. But with Maxwell, everything felt contaminated. Every happy memory from his childhood now came with the question, when did he start seeing me as a means to get what he wanted instead of as his mother? Did he ever genuinely love me, or was I always just a source of resources for him? Those questions tormented me during the day and kept me awake at night. A week after the eviction, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but something in me needed to know who it was. Margaret. It was Claire's voice, small and fragile. "It's me, Claire. Please don't hang up." I stayed silent, waiting. "I just want you to know. I didn't know anything," she continued, her voice breaking. "I didn't know Maxwell was using your money. He told me his business was doing great, that we could afford those luxuries. When I saw the gifts, the expensive dinners, the vacation, I thought we were finally getting ahead. I never imagined it was all with stolen money." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I heard her sobbing on the other end. "Why are you calling me, Claire?" I asked, tired, with no energy for more drama. "Because I need you to know the truth," she replied between sobs. "Maxwell isn't the man I thought he was. Since you kicked us out of the apartment, he's shown his true colors. He's furious all the time. He blames me for not being more helpful in convincing you. He says if I had insisted more, you would have given in. We're living at his friend Alex's house, sleeping on a pull-out sofa, and Maxwell spends all day looking for ways to get revenge on you instead of looking for a job or a new apartment." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Revenge? How?" Claire took a deep breath. "He's been calling your neighbors, telling them you're a cruel old woman who abandoned her pregnant son on the street. He's posted horrible things about you on social media, saying you're an unfit mother. He even talked about going to your old workplace, about making a public scene to humiliate you. My heart started to beat faster. Claire, if you're calling me to scare me— No, she interrupted urgently. I'm calling to warn you, and to ask you for something. I'm leaving, Margaret. I'm going back to my parents' house in Ohio. I can't be with a man who is capable of hating his own mother that much. If he's capable of this, what will he do to me when the baby is born and things get tough? I felt a mixture of relief and sadness for Claire. That sounds like a wise decision, I told her sincerely. But before I go, Claire continued, I need to return something. 2 days later, Claire came to my house. She arrived in a taxi with a small suitcase and a paper bag in her hands. She looked haggard, with deep dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I invited her in, but she shook her head. I can't stay long. Maxwell thinks I'm at the doctor. I just came to give you this. She handed me the paper bag. Inside were several items. The designer handbag Maxwell had bought her, a pair of expensive earrings, a silk scarf. I don't want them, Claire said, her voice firm. They were bought with your money. They don't belong to me. I took the bag, moved by the gesture. Claire, this isn't your fault. I know, she interrupted, but I still can't keep them. Every time I look at them, I'm reminded of this whole disaster. We stood in silence for a moment. Is the baby okay? I asked finally, unable to hold back the question that had been eating at me. Claire nodded, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. Yes, he's fine. I just had my first ultrasound. She hesitated, then pulled a photo from her pocket and held it out to me. I thought, maybe you'd want to see it. I took the photo with trembling hands. It was a blurry black and white image where you could barely make out a tiny shape that would be my grandchild. I felt something break inside me. All the defenses I had built up crumbled in an instant. It's beautiful, I whispered, tracing the outline of the image with my finger. Margaret, Claire said softly, I know Maxwell did terrible things to you. I know he has to face the consequences. But this baby is innocent. And even if you and Maxwell can't fix your relationship, I hope someday you can meet your grandchild, because every child deserves to have a grandmother, especially one like you. Her words pierced me like arrows. One like me, I repeated bitterly. Maxwell called me a bitter, cruel old woman. Claire shook her head. Maxwell is hurt and resentful. But I saw how you were with him when he came to visit. I saw how you made his favorite food every Sunday, how you kept his childhood photos in your living room, how you lit up whenever you talked about him. That's not a cruel woman. That's a woman who loved her son unconditionally, until he broke that trust in the worst possible way. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, and I couldn't stop them. Thank you, was all I could say. Claire hugged me, a brief but sincere hug, and then pulled away toward the waiting taxi. When the baby is born, I'll send you pictures, she said before getting in. And when he's ready, if you're ready, you can meet. But away from Maxwell, at least until he decides to grow up and be a real man. I watched the taxi drive down the street and stood in my doorway, holding the ultrasound to my chest, feeling a mix of hope and pain I didn't know how to process. That night, I put the ultrasound in a small frame I had saved and placed it on my nightstand, where I could see it before I went to sleep. I also gathered the items Claire had returned. The next day, I took them to a consignment shop and sold them. The money, about $3,000, I deposited into a new account I opened specifically for my future grandchild. If Claire kept her word and allowed me to be part of the baby's life, that money would be there for his education, for his future, for the things that truly mattered. The days turned into weeks. Maxwell didn't contact me again, didn't threaten me, didn't show up at my old workplace as Claire had warned. It was as if he had disappeared from my life completely, leaving only a huge void where my son used to be. Some days, that void hurt so much I could barely breathe. Other days, I felt relieved, free from the toxicity our relationship had become. I learned to live with that duality, with the fact that both feelings could be true at the same time. 1 month after the eviction, I was at the grocery store doing my weekly shopping when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Margaret? Margaret Delgado? I turned and saw Lauren, an old coworker from my accounting days. We hadn't seen each other in at least 5 years. Lauren, what a surprise. I greeted her with a genuine smile. Lauren pushed her card over, her face full of concern. Margaret, I heard some rumors. And I need to know if you're okay. Someone told me your son was saying horrible things about you on social media, that he accused you of abandoning him. I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation all over again. It's a long story, Lauren. She took my hand in hers. I've got time. Want to get a coffee after this? I accepted her offer. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't involved in the drama, someone who could give me an outside perspective. An hour later, we were sitting in a small cafe, and for the first time since it all began, I told my full story to another person. I showed her the documents, told her about the stolen money, about Maxwell's cruel words, about Claire's pregnancy, about everything. Lauren listened to my entire story in silence, never interrupting, just nodding occasionally or squeezing my hand when I got to the most painful parts. When I finished, I felt exhausted, but also strangely relieved, as if sharing the weight of it all had made it a little lighter. Lauren took a long sip of her coffee, looked me directly in the eyes, and said something I'll never forget. Margaret, you did exactly what you had to do, and anyone who judges you for it doesn't understand what it means to set healthy boundaries, even with your own children. Her words surprised me, because I had been expecting her to say I was too harsh, that mothers must always forgive, all those clichés society teaches us to repeat without question. Do you really think so? I asked, my voice uncertain. Lauren nodded firmly. Absolutely. Look, I have kids too, 3 of them. I love them with all my heart. I'd give my life for them without a second thought. But if one of them stole from me, lied to me, and then planned to manipulate and humiliate me, I would do the exact same thing you did. Because loving your children doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Loving your children also means teaching them that actions have consequences. I felt tears of relief roll down my cheeks. For weeks, I had tortured myself, thinking I was a bad mother, that I had failed in some fundamental way. To hear another mother, another woman who understood the complexity of these relationships, validate my decision, was like a balm for my wounded soul. But the baby, I whispered. I'm going to lose the chance to meet my grandchild. Lauren shook her head. Claire told you she'd send pictures, that you could meet eventually. That door isn't closed, Margaret. And honestly, if Maxwell continues on this path, that child is eventually going to grow up and ask his own questions. He's going to want to know his grandmother. The truth always comes out. I left that cafe feeling stronger than I had in weeks. Lauren was right. I had done the right thing. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been painless. But it had been necessary. That night, for the first time since the eviction, I slept through the night without waking up from nightmares. I dreamed of Robert, of the happy days we had shared, of his laugh and his way of always finding the bright side of things. In the dream, he took my hand and told me, I'm proud of you. You were braver than I ever could have been. The weeks turned into months. I rented the condo where Maxwell had lived to a young, newly married couple who paid on time and treated me with respect. I went back to my usual routine. I worked from home, doing some accounting consulting for small businesses. I tended my garden. I met Lauren for coffee on Thursdays. Life went on, quieter than before, lonelier too, but with a peace I hadn't felt in years. I no longer had to worry about calls asking for money, about visits where Maxwell only wanted something from me, about that constant feeling of being used. One day in October, 3 months after the eviction, I received a package in the mail. It had no return address, just my address written in a feminine handwriting I recognized as Claire's. I opened the package with trembling hands, and inside I found a letter and several photographs. The letter said, Dear Margaret, I want you to know that I'm back in Ohio with my parents. I officially separated from Maxwell 2 weeks ago. He's not seeking help. He's not changing. He's just sinking deeper into his bitterness and resentment. My parents are supporting me through the pregnancy. I'm 5 months pregnant now, and it's a boy. I decided to name him Robert, after your husband, because when you told me stories about him, you always talked about what a good and honest man he was. I hope my son grows up to be like his grandfather, not his father. I kept reading, tears falling onto the paper. The photos I'm including are from my latest ultrasounds. The baby is healthy and growing well. When he's born, I'd love for you to meet him, if you want to. I know I can't replace the relationship you lost with Maxwell, but maybe we can build something new, something healthy, for little Robert. You don't have to answer now. Take your time. I just wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten you, and I don't blame you for anything. With affection, Claire. The photographs showed a perfectly formed baby, with his little hands, his feet, his profile, my grandchild, Robert. I felt a wave of love so strong it took my breath away. That same afternoon, I wrote back to Claire using the return address she had included. I thanked her for keeping me informed, told her I would love to meet Robert when she was ready, and I included a check for $2,000 to help her with the baby's expenses. I also sent her the framed ultrasound she had given me months ago, thinking she might like to have it. In my letter, I wrote, "Claire, I admire your strength and courage for making the hard decisions that will protect your son. I am here when you need me, not as a meddling mother-in-law, but as someone who genuinely cares for you and for Robert." It was 2 weeks before I got a reply. Claire called me, crying, thanking me for the check, telling me her parents wanted to meet me too, that her whole family was grateful the baby would have at least one grandmother who cared about him. We talked for almost an hour, catching up on our lives, sharing hopes for the future. For the first time in months, I felt that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. In November, I received another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize, but that had Maxwell's area code. I answered cautiously. "Margaret Delgado?" It was a professional, male voice. "Yes, this is she. My name is Gregory. I'm an attorney. I'm calling on behalf of your son, Maxwell Delgado. He wishes to file a lawsuit against you for wrongful eviction and emotional damages." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice calm. "I understand. I recommend you contact my lawyer, Stephen Foster." I gave him Stephen's number and hung up. I immediately called Stephen and told him about the call. He sighed deeply. "Margaret, this was expected. Maxwell is desperate, and that lawyer probably promised him he could win some money. But don't you worry. We have all the documentation needed to defend your case. The eviction was completely legal and justified. They don't have a leg to stand on. How long will this take?" I asked, feeling tired. "Probably several months. But trust me, we're going to win." Stephen was right. The next few months were exhausting, filled with legal notices, depositions, meetings with lawyers. But every time I had to testify or present evidence, I reminded myself why I was doing this. The trial took place in February, on a cold, gray day that seemed to perfectly reflect the state of my heart. I arrived at the courthouse with Stephen, wearing my best beige suit, my hair pulled back with dignity, my mother's white china teacup wrapped and tucked in my purse like a talisman of strength. Maxwell was already there when we walked in, sitting next to his lawyer, Gregory, a man in his 40s with a gray suit and a professionally bored expression. Our eyes met for a second, and what I saw in my son's eyes chilled my blood. There was no regret, no sadness, just a cold, hard resentment like steel. The judge, an older man named Arthur Hayes, called the court to order, and the hearing began. Maxwell's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a cruel mother who had thrown her pregnant son and his wife out onto the street, without warning, without compassion, without any real justification. "Your Honor," Gregory said in a dramatic voice, "my client and his wife were left literally homeless overnight. Mrs. Delgado acted with calculated coldness, indifferent to the fact that her daughter-in-law was pregnant, without considering the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just a wrongful eviction. It was an act of familial cruelty that deserves compensation." I listened to every word, feeling the anger bubble in my chest, but I kept my face serene, my posture dignified. Stephen had prepared me for this. He had told me Maxwell's lawyer would try to paint me as the villain. When it was Stephen's turn, he stood up calmly and began to present our evidence. The bank statements showing the $8,200 Maxwell had taken without authorization. The copies of the conversations where Maxwell planned to manipulate and control me. The lease agreement that clearly stipulated the causes for immediate termination. Every document was presented meticulously, each piece of evidence building an unbreakable case. "Your Honor," Stephen said, his voice clear and firm, What we have here is not a cruel mother abandoning her son. What we have is a 66-year-old woman defending her property and her dignity from an adult son who was financially exploiting her. Maxwell Delgado is not an innocent victim. He is a 35-year-old man who stole from his own mother, who planned to continue manipulating her, and who now seeks to play the victim when he finally faced consequences for his actions. I looked at Maxwell and saw his jaw tighten, his hands clench into fists on the table. The judge then asked me to take the stand to give my testimony. I walked forward, my legs shaking, but holding myself tall. Maxwell's lawyer questioned me first, asking questions designed to make me look like a heartless mother. Mrs. Delgado, is it true that you executed the eviction knowing your daughter-in-law was pregnant? Yes, I replied clearly. And you didn't care about leaving your future grandchild homeless? Let me correct something, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I didn't leave anyone homeless. Maxwell is an adult man with a college education that I paid for, with work experience, perfectly capable of finding another place to live. What I did was stop allowing him to live on my property for a minimal rent while he was stealing thousands of dollars from me. Gregory tried to interrupt me, but the judge stopped him. Let her finish, I continued, feeling years of pain turn into words. For 35 years, I gave my son everything I had. I worked double shifts to pay for his college. I spent my savings on his wedding. I offered him my condo for a fraction of its real value, and he took all of that and used it against me. He didn't just steal money. He planned to control me financially, to humiliate me, to make me beg, all while I still believed I was helping my son build his future. Tears started to roll down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted everyone in that courtroom to see my pain, to see the betrayal I had suffered. And the baby? Gregory insisted. You don't care about your grandchild? I care deeply, I answered, my voice breaking. That's why I opened a savings account with the money from the items Maxwell bought with my money. That's why I've stayed in contact with Claire, even after Maxwell threatened me. That's why I am going to be part of my grandchild's life, if Claire allows me. But I will not allow Maxwell to use that baby as a tool of manipulation, as he tried to do when I told him the eviction stood. I saw Maxwell jump up from his chair. That's a lie, he shouted. You never cared about us. You only care about your money. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. Mr. Delgado, sit down immediately, or I will have you removed from the courtroom. Maxwell sat down slowly, but his glare toward me was pure venom. The rest of the trial was a parade of evidence and counter-evidence. Stephen presented written testimony from my neighbors attesting to my character, from former colleagues confirming my professional integrity. He even presented a sworn affidavit from Claire, who, from Ohio, confirmed that Maxwell had hidden the source of the money he spent and that she fully supported my decision to set boundaries. Maxwell's lawyer tried to discredit every piece of evidence, but it was clear he didn't have much to work with. The truth was on my side, cold and documented. After 3 hours, the judge retired to deliberate. Stephen and I waited in the hallway, sitting on an uncomfortable wooden bench, not saying much. Maxwell and his lawyer were at the other end of the hall, Maxwell pacing like a caged animal. 40 minutes later, we were called back in. Judge Hayes had a serious expression as he read his verdict. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he began, his voice solemn. This court finds that the eviction executed by Mrs. Margaret Delgado was completely justified and legal. I felt my whole body relax with relief. The judge continued. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Maxwell Delgado engaged in fraudulent conduct by misusing his mother's financial resources. The lease agreement included specific clauses for termination for just cause, clauses which Mr. Delgado violated. Furthermore, the recordings and transcripts presented show intent to manipulate and commit emotional abuse. The judge looked directly at Maxwell. Mr. Delgado, the law does not protect adult children who exploit their elderly parents. Your mother had every right to protect her property and her well-being. The lawsuit is dismissed in its entirety. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court orders Mr. Maxwell Delgado to reimburse his mother the amount of $8,200 that he took without authorization from her bank accounts, plus interest and legal costs. Mr. Delgado has 6 months to comply with this payment. Otherwise, further legal action will be pursued. I saw Maxwell go completely pale. I saw his lawyer whisper something in his ear, probably explaining that he had just lost not only the case, but now owed me the stolen money plus his own lawyer's fees. The judge retired, and the courtroom began to empty. Stephen hugged me, congratulating me on the victory. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, empty, as if I had run a marathon only to reach a finish line that no longer meant anything. As Stephen gathered the documents, Maxwell approached me. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he shrugged him off. We stood face to face, mother and son, separated by a chasm that no court ruling could close. "I hope you're happy," he said, his voice full of bitterness. "You won your money. I hope it was worth losing your son." I looked him in the eyes. This son who had once been my entire world, and I felt a sadness so profound I could barely breathe. "Maxwell," I said softly, "I didn't lose my son. You lost your mother the day you decided my value was in my bank account and not in the love I gave you for 35 years. He opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. We stood there, in silence, until he finally turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. 3 months after the trial, on a warm day in May, I got a call from Claire. Her voice sounded different, tired but happy. "Margaret, he's born. Robert is here." I felt my heart expand in my chest, like every cell in my body was waking up with a joy I hadn't felt in years. "Are you both okay? Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're perfect. It was a long labor, but no complications. He weighs 7.5 pounds, has the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen, and I think he has your nose," she laughed softly. "Margaret, I know you just won the trial and things have been hard, but I would love for you to come and meet him. My parents want to meet you, too." 2 days later, I was on a bus to Ohio, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone on the bus could hear it. I had a bag full of gifts for the baby clothes I had knitted myself during sleepless nights, a soft ivory-colored blanket, a small teddy bear, and a letter I had written for little Robert, explaining who his grandfather was, the man he was named after. I also brought my mother's white china teacup, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Someday I would give it to Robert, so he would know that some things survived the storm. Claire's parents' house was small but cozy, painted a pale yellow with a garden full of flowers. Claire opened the door, and we hugged. 2 women united by tragedy but also by the hope for something new. Come in," she said, guiding me inside. "Mom, Dad, this is Margaret." An older couple approached, smiling. Karen, Claire's mother, was a plump woman with rosy cheeks and kind eyes. David, her father, was a tall, thin man with working hands and a shy smile. "Welcome to our home," Karen said, hugging me as if she had known me all her life. "Claire has told us everything. You are a very brave woman." And then I saw him. In a small wooden bassinet next to the sofa, wrapped in a light blue blanket, slept Robert. I approached slowly, almost afraid, as if it were a dream that could shatter if I moved too quickly. He was perfect. Small, fragile, with a fuzz of black hair, his fists balled up next to his face, his cheeks round and pink. "Can I?" I asked Claire, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course," she said. "He's your grandson." I held out my arms, and Claire placed Robert in them carefully. The weight of that baby, that new, innocent life, took my breath away. All the tears I had held back for months finally flowed freely. "Hello, Robert," I whispered, as he opened his tiny eyes and looked up at me, not really focusing. "I'm your Grandma Margaret. I'm so sorry I wasn't here from the beginning, but I promise I'm here now. I'm going to tell you stories about your Grandpa Robert, the best man I ever knew. You're going to grow up knowing you come from a line of strong, honest people who don't give up even when everything seems lost." The baby yawned, moved his little hands, and one of his fingers curled around my finger. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Hope that the mistakes of one generation didn't have to be repeated in the next, that this child could grow up and be different. I spent 3 days in Ohio, getting to know Claire's family, helping with Robert, sharing meals and conversations. Karen and David treated me with a warmth I didn't expect, as if I were part of their family. One night, while Claire was sleeping and I was holding a fussy Robert, David sat down next to me. "Margaret," he said in his gentle voice, "Claire told us everything that happened with Maxwell. I want you to know, we don't judge you. You did what you had to do. And this boy is going to have the privilege of knowing a grandmother who had the courage to set boundaries, even when it hurt." His words comforted me in a way I didn't know I needed. When I returned home, everything looked different. The walls that had felt so empty now seemed full of possibility. I placed a photo of Robert in my living room next to the photos of Robert Sr. I started making plans to visit once a month, to maintain that connection, to be the grandmother that child deserved. Maxwell never contacted Claire asking about his son. According to her, he had disappeared completely after the trial, wasn't paying the child support the judge had ordered, didn't call, didn't write. It was as if he had decided that if he couldn't have control, he didn't want anything at all. 6 months after Robert's birth, in November, I received a legal notice. Maxwell had declared bankruptcy, and the money he owed me would likely never be seen. Stephen called me, apologizing, explaining the legal options we had, but I stopped him. "Let it go," I told him. "I don't want to chase that money anymore. I don't want any connection to him." It was true. The money didn't matter anymore. I had gained something far more valuable, my dignity, my peace, and a relationship with my grandson that was growing stronger every day. A year after the eviction, I was sitting in my green velvet armchair, drinking tea from my mother's white china teacup, looking out the window at the garden Robert and I had planted together so many years ago. In my lap, I had a photo album of Robert Jr., now 1 year old, taking his first steps, smiling with 2 tiny teeth. Elena sent me pictures every week, called me to tell me his progress, included me in every important moment. The boy called me Gamma, his version of Grandma, and every time I heard it, my heart melted. Lauren was coming to visit that day, as she did every Thursday. I showed her the latest photos, told her about Claire's plans to move closer to my city so Robert could see me more often. "Look how far you've come," Lauren said, squeezing my hand. "A year ago, you were devastated, and now look at you. You rebuilt your life, you set healthy boundaries, and you gained a beautiful relationship with your grandson." She was right. The pain had been immense, the loss devastating, but I had survived. And I hadn't just survived, I had flourished in ways I never imagined possible. Some nights, I still thought about Maxwell. I wondered where he was, if he ever reflected on what he had lost, if he would one day come seeking reconciliation. I had decided that if that day ever came, I would listen. But reconciliation would require more than empty apologies. It would require real accountability, genuine change, and time. A lot of time. For now, I focused on what I had. My home, my peace, my dignity intact, and a beautiful grandchild who filled my heart with joy every time I saw him. I took my white china teacup, the same one I had held on the worst days of my life, the same one my mother had given me, telling me some things are too precious to be broken, and I took a long sip of tea. I looked at Robert Sr.'s photo on the wall and spoke to him silently, as I often did. "I made it, my love. It was horrible, it was heartbreaking, but I made it. I set boundaries. I defended my dignity. And our grandson is going to grow up knowing he comes from strong people, people who don't let themselves be trampled, not even by those they love." The sun was beginning to set, filling my living room with a warm, golden light. I got up, watered my plants, made some dinner, and sat down to eat in peace. My house was my fortress, my sanctuary, my kingdom. And I had learned, in the most painful way possible, that sometimes loving someone means letting them go, means closing doors you never thought you'd have to close. But I had also learned that on the other side of those closed doors, new windows sometimes open, opportunities for a different, but equally valid, kind of love. That night, before sleeping, I wrote in my journal, something I had started doing as therapy during the difficult months. Today marks exactly 1 year since I made the hardest decision of my life. 1 year since I chose my dignity over the comfort of remaining a victim. I don't regret it. It hurts. It probably always will hurt a little, but I don't regret it, because I learned that true love, the love that's worth having, doesn't require you to destroy yourself to prove it. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. And I learned that even at 67 years old, I can still be brave. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and fell asleep hugging the photo of Robert Jr., dreaming of all the Sunday afternoons we would spend together, all the stories I would tell him, and all the love I still had to give. My home is my fortress, and now I know exactly who deserves to be inside.